So do not swear an oath. We live in a culture where we have decreased, in morals, values, even in the church. I believe the church has digressed so much that even if we talk about normal Christianity, you're seen as a radical. And I really do believe that this is one of these statements where, people say, oh no, you're taking it too far, come on, it doesn't mean much, don't worry about it. Come on, God knows my heart and stuff like that. But I promise you, God doesn't take this topic as lightly as we might do. We live in a society of, lies, and even people in the world and in the church have tendencies to lie. It seems like part of human nature. We're always lying to protect ourselves, protect others, for self-gain, hurt other people, gossip, so on. And let's be serious. We tend, it's like someone come up to you and saying, can you pray for me tonight? You get home and you fall right to sleep and you forget to pray for that person that you said that you were going to pray for. And even that, we get caught up so much in the world that we sometimes even forget what promises or what we said we were going to do, just we don't fulfill it. And look at oaths today. Marriages. We spoke about marriage quite a bit the past two topics, and we see divorce and married couples with affairs and stuff like that, and it just seems like oaths are just not taken seriously in God's eyes. No, in our eyes, that we're not taking it seriously as how important an oath means to God. When you marry someone, unless for sexual morality, it should be for life. That's an oath. You make an oath to that you'll, until death do us part. That's it. And a joke, you always need to never treat an oath lightly, and always think that if you don't fulfill an oath, that there will be consequences in that, from God's point of view. And remember that the whole gospel takes every single detail of your life seriously. It takes every single detail, every thought, every action, everything. What you say, God knows everything what you would say, even if He'll even remember an oath you took in your life. And that depends on, if even at the time you made an oath jokingly, without even knowing it, or depending on how seriously, God knows when you said it and if you fulfilled it. It's so important to understand that oaths and swearing on something is really important, really something that should be talked about. Let's open up the word to Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. We've gone through the Sermon on the Mount, and we talked about murder, adultery, divorce, and now we come up to the next one, which is oaths. And it says, again, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool for his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is of evil. It's an interesting statement. The first thing I like to point out, it says at the beginning, again, you have heard it said the ancients were told. Obviously, Jesus is referring back to the Jewish ancestry. But it's interesting because it says, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. I thought it was interesting that, that statement that Jesus is quoting is nowhere to be found actually in the Old Testament. It's something what the Pharisees have done, they've harmonized oaths into, there are oaths in the Old Testament and stuff and God's commandments, but what they've done, they've harmonized it into this one passage. And it's basically rabbinic tradition. Jesus is quoting something they had been teaching in the synagogues, and they've kind of harmonized it into into one sentence. So, I mean, these Pharisees knew laws and oaths and swearing on something. I mean, if you take, you see the third commandment of the 10 Commandments, do not take the name of the Lord God in vain. They'll be very familiar with that. Or Leviticus 19:20, you shall not swear falsely by my name, or so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So, I mean, they'll take, there's more scripture verses and stuff like that on oaths. So, but what they've done, they've harmonized it into one passage, and Jesus is quoting rabbinic tradition. However, in doing so, what the Pharisees have done, they've kind of used this quote to kind of cover up their own swears and oaths, so Jesus is basically correcting this false teaching of kind of just harmonizing it into one passage. I mean, according to history, one of the greatest problems Moses had to deal with was people lying to one another. I mean, and it got to a point where people could not rely on each other's words, who was telling the truth and who wasn't. So God created these laws to create order within God's people. However, the Pharisees, like they do all the time, take God's perfect law and turn it legalistic, like they do with adultery. They don't understand the depth of it. They just kind of see it as just physical, and then that's it. Same thing here. They've just kind of customized this in a way where it kind of suits them. And I'll go more in depth later on. And also, I mean, this legalism kind of hits the church too, with Christians get caught up in legalism. I mean, works, and people value works and really loving God, and so still relevant today. So Jesus immediately quotes their false teaching, and now he says what is the true teaching on oaths. To begin Jesus' teaching, Jesus says, I say to you, which obviously implies that Jesus has authority. He is the lawgiver. He knows what the law is meant to say and how we're meant to see it. I mean, the first thing Jesus says in his teaching, which is interesting, Jesus says, make no oaths at all. Make no oaths at all. Make no oaths at all. I mean, but now that kind of questioned me a bit, because if you think about it, throughout the Old Testament, there are godly men who did take oaths. Abraham, David, even God had a covenant with Abraham about his descendants. So I guess in saying that, I mean, I guess oaths in general aren't necessarily a bad thing. It's not like a bad thing. I mean, however, it's just the consequence of not fulfilling it. That's where you come under judgment. And I think Jesus is trying to prevent from that happening. But I want to look at a passage in the Old Testament where in Judges 11, where a great man, Jephthah, where he made an oath to God, which seemed like because he was a man of God himself, and he wanted just to please God, and he made an oath. Now, and we'll find out if this oath actually paid off or not. So if we turn to Judges 11, verse 29 to 35. And it says, now the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, so that he passed through Gilgad and Manasseh. Then he passed through Mizpah and Gilgad, and from Mizpah, the Gilgad, he went on to the sons of Ammon. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will indeed give me the sons of Ammon into my hands, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, then I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, and it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it as a burnt offering." So Jephthah crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hands, and he struck them down with a very great slaughter of Arah and the entrance of the Minnith, 20 cities, as far as El-Kiram. So the sons of Ammon were subdued before the sons of Israel. When Jephthah came to his house in Mizpah, behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with a tambourine and with dancing. And she was his only child, and besides her he had no son or daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes. "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." How sad. How sad. You make an oath to God, and you must fulfill it at what cost, no matter what you do. To make a long story short, he actually had to sacrifice his one and only daughter as a burnt offering because he made a vow. He made an oath to God that whoever comes out that door, that would be the thing that he would use as a burnt offering. I like the reason I want to share that is because it just shows, one, it shows how much an oath meant to him, that he would even go as far as fulfilling the oath that it may even cost his daughter's life. But it also shows that we as Christians should really be careful what we oath upon, like what we swear upon. Because if you're not careful what you oath for, it can come back and bite. It can come back and really backfire on you. It really can. Even to the point of even losing a loved one. And to be honest, if he didn't fulfill that, people probably would question that. God probably would question and be like, "This is what you gave me. You made an oath to me." But being a man of God, and a man of his word, he stuck to it. It's a tragic story, and I think the first point I'd like to make, I think Jesus is really pointing out, really be careful what you oath for. Really be careful, because it can come back to bite you. But if you know in your heart that what you're oathing for you will fulfill, then obviously do it. But the second point I'd like to say is, if we go back to Matthew 5. Go back to Matthew 5, verse 34 again. Jesus says, "But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool for his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King." I think the problem we have today about oaths is it's the same thing with divorce. It's the flippancy of divorce. It kind of doesn't mean much. And we kind of just say these statements without really actually having any sort of conviction about them. It's like saying, we hear, obviously, I'm not saying it for real, but "Oh my God," or "Jesus Christ." We say all these stuff just kind of out of our mouths, and it's the flippancy of it. And what are we actually saying? And I think even back in Jesus' time, it was kind of the misuses of sacred titles like God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, and just the mindless oaths that we're saying, and how majority of the time when we say that, we're not going to fulfill them, and then we come under judgment. So if we could, and an example of this, I believe, is Matthew 23, verse 17. And it says, "You fools and blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that sacrificed the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the offering on it, he is obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Therefore, whoever swears by the altar swears both by the altar and everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears both the temple and him who dwells within it. And whoever swears by heaven swears both by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it." Here's another example here where the Pharisees, like I said before, they harmonized scripture to kind of fulfill what they kind of like. So they kind of got to a point where they chose what vows were suitable and what wasn't. Here, they thought swearing by, swearing by the altar was nothing. So they kind of got to the point where, they choosing what's good to make an oath on, what isn't. But Jesus actually explains to them that even oathing on that has a consequence, because there's a greater meaning to that. And then there's obviously, and again, it's the whole thing about what I was saying before. They don't understand the depth of what an oath means. And, it's amazing how, Jesus explains how, that even the altar, the temple in heaven were considered worthy, that even swearing on those, there were heavy consequences for those. And it's just the flippancy again I was talking about, how it just seemed like there was no value, like they didn't value the altar, they just kind of swear by it, or they swear on the temple, there was no value to it. And what I'm saying to you guys today is that be careful of what you say, control your tongue and what you say, because you can't just go around saying God or Jesus and make oaths just mindlessly, because that can come back to bite you. There'll be deeper consequences for that. So if we go back to Matthew 5, verse 34 again. Another thing I would like to point out too is also stay away from exaggerated oaths or lies, because this gives the listener a false view of the situation, what it was really like. I think we always tend to, I think we're all guilty of this, when we see a situation happen or something's happening, and we tend to exaggerate than what it really is. And again, I think that also comes under judgment. But also, I do believe that this is also a heart issue. And what I mean by that is, we need to examine ourselves, that can we really fulfill this oath? If we make a vow, we hear stories that, someone can, call this church and say, I'm going to give money to this church, and then 3 days later they call back and says, I can't do it. Before you make a decision, before you make an oath or something, you should really examine yourself. Can you actually fulfill it? Now, so, for example, marriage, or say if you're in a courtroom, they say nothing, tell me the truth and nothing but the truth. If you're in a courtroom, you would have to make an oath in that aspect. And just always make sure that, when you give an oath, you can fulfill it. But if you know that there are chances that you can't fulfill it, then don't make an oath at all. I like what James chapter 5 and says. He says, above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or any other oath. But let your answer be yes is to be yes, and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment. I think it's so important that don't be put into a corner where someone says, swear by your God this, or swear on this to tell the truth. If you're an honest person and your yeses actually mean something to you, then you don't need to make an oath at all. The more time, every time you say yes, let your yeses be truthful. And let your no's actually be truth in that. Because the moment you start making your yeses and then turn into lies, no one's going to trust you. And then therefore, it's kind of like, I kind of like to see it as that consequences. Like, you do one sin and leads to another. If you say yes to something and you don't do it, therefore that trust value just loses it. And they put you in a corner and say, how can I trust you? Swear on this. And it kind of just go into the cycle. And, and I really believe that, we should really make our yeses yes and no's no's, because if we start swearing on other things, we will fall into judgment, and we start doing what is evil in God's sight. So I really believe what Jesus is saying. I really believe Jesus is really saying that, we need to control our tongues and what we say, and really, and not have this mindless, empty talk, and just swearing on things just for the sake of it without even having any value to it. Having, sacred titles like Jesus, God, and value that, and not put the Lord's God name in vain. And also, like, when I mean empty talk, also unresolved oaths and control over what we say. If you're not unsure, if you can't do something, just say to that person, I can try it and I'll do my best. Like, if you're unsure of something, that's why it's important to examine yourself. Can you actually fulfill this? If this person is asking this something of you, can you actually do it? And I think it's a good Christian principle in anything in your life to always examine yourself, to really feel like, can I do it? Especially if you're going into, like, say, a marriage or something. Are you sure you want to be with this person the rest of your life? Because if you don't, then there could be some sort of consequences with that. That's why it's so important to, I believe, to kind of not be put into situations, and to be an honest man, and where your yeses actually mean something. I think it's important for every Christian to be in that situation. So always make sure as Christians, as men and women of God, that our yeses actually mean yes and our no's actually mean no, because then we fall into this trap of just people throwing us in the corner and forcing us to actually probably make an oath. So just control our minds, our hearts, and make sure that if we ever did have to make an oath, we know in our hearts we can fulfill it.